So let's start standing up and speaking up now, because there is more and more people that are doing it. And the more of us do it, the more of us that do it, the more courage we will get. The more other people will start doing it. And suddenly the silent majority will become the vocal majority.
Welcome to the Conscious Rebel Podcast with your host, Lucy Morningstar.
I found out about you, as I just posted a post on Facebook saying men can't be women, right? And then there was like my most viral, most of the time not many people really care about what I say, my opinions and stuff. And I have been probably shadow banned, maybe in a word, by Facebook for a while, because as I started posting those anti-vaccine and all the conspiracy stuff, right? So my posts since then, it's got, probably 100th of what it used to get. And then I posted a post like "Men Can't Be Women," and it's overnight, it got like over 400 hateful comments. Like those were the people that used to be in my, the community that I was in, then just started, you know what they say about, turf and all that kind of stuff. And that you are so hateful, that you are blah, blah, blah. Like I was, wow. I knew people in my community wouldn't like that, but I didn't expect it with that many comments. But the interesting thing is, and then the next day, it was like another, you would have over 900 comments, and most of them that are new people saw my post and started coming to like support. Of course, men can't be women. So they started, so I said, met some new people. And that's how I met you, because then some of the new women that I met then introduced me to the coalition of
Coalition of Biological Reality.
Facebook group. And then I saw someone posted a link about you, a newspaper article, how you got fired from your position after maybe just a week or so into your job in the Western Australia Girls Guide, because you questioned their guideline, which they changed without the parents' knowledge, right? So can you, I've heard you talk about it and I read the articles, but can you tell us what actually happened? So
yeah, of course. So you're right. I started as the CEO of Girl Guides WA, and on day 10, I was terminated as a result of questioning. Well, basically, I reached out to Catherine Deves because she's a human rights lawyer. She's the founder of Save Our Sports Australasia. And I reached out to her to develop a relationship and a partnership because I'd noticed that Girl Guides WA had changed their constitutional definition of women and girl. Instead of being a biological female under the age of 18 and over the age of 18, they changed it to anyone who identified as such. Now, this is in line with Girl Guides Australia. This is in line with Girl Guidings International. This has been happening in the UK, etc. as well. And it's blowing up over there as a result of Mayor Forstater and a whole pile of other people. But again, this has happened all over the world, where effectively Girl Guiding has capitulated to the radical trans agenda that denies biological sex, and they have all done this, they've all done that, whether they've changed it in their constitution or whether they've changed it in their policies. But effectively what they're doing is they're now, instead of being a girls only organisation, they are accepting boys and men as volunteers into their organisation if they identify as women. And of course, all of this has happened without any consultation with parents at all. So when I was terminated as a result of this, reaching out to Catherine, a small LGBT newspaper saw that, then questioned them about whether this was Girl Guides policy. When I said to them, look, let's just let them know that this is what the CEO is examining. Hold on to your hats when these media things happen. If it's going to be a storm, it'll often pass in 48 hours. Let's just hold on to it. It wasn't a storm at all. It got absolutely no traction. Since then, there's only been one comment on the online article. So it got absolutely no traction. But of course, within hours, I was already terminated. So,
but how come if there was no traction at all, then like why would they still like terminate you and all that?
Their argument was that I'd put the organisation at risk of bad public relations, but instead of waiting to see whether that was the case, they just folded. The reason why they folded is the same thing, but that you've got Girl Guiding WA, which is their own organisation. Each state is separate, but then there's a peak body where there's Girl Guiding Australia that gets the licence, and it's a very interesting relationship between Girl Guiding Australia and the different states. While it doesn't have any direct authority, it does have a lot of influence. They, of course, would have been very heavily pushing, I would imagine. I don't know, but they are the ones who initiated this policy. This came from Girl Guiding. It didn't come because they suddenly had all these trans kids wanting to come in. It didn't come because our parents were asking for this to be. Girl Guiding Australia came up with this as a policy issue following what's happening in the UK. So in other words, they agree with the ideology. And because they agree with the ideology, and I was obviously challenging the ideology, I assume I was just too hard and I was thrown out the door. Because if it was because of public relations risk, the only risk that they encountered via public relations was resulted from terminating me and not from the original article, because the original article got no traction. But once I was terminated, I contacted them and I said, look, you've jumped the gun a bit here. This is a far more serious issue than you realize. You're fundamentally undermining the rights of girls and women. You're fundamentally undermining the whole aim of the organization, which is girls' development, etc., and done in a single sex format. By definition, Girl Guides is an exclusionary organization. And in terms of the public relations, that what's happened with this radical trans agenda, it's coming to a head, and it's soon all of this is happening without the mainstream understanding, the mainstream population understanding. They're starting to become more aware of that, and when they do, there is going to be kickback, and all the institutions that have been captured and capitulated to this ideology will end up having a very severe public relations problem when the wider community finds out about that and says, why on earth did you do this? And that's what I said to Girl Guides. You're an iconic institution, over 100 years old, the peak girls development organization. The fact that you've also been captured, have done this surreptitiously without letting the parents know, when this all comes to a head and suddenly the radical trans agenda is no longer flavor of the month, and actually there's a lot of pushback from it, then will be very, very strong reputational damage for Girl Guides. So therefore, please, bring me back in. Let's at least have the conversation. They flatly refused to have the conversation with me. And then I felt that I had no choice, that I needed to take this to the national media, because of course, this is a crucial human rights issue. Parents have got a right to know this is the case. They've completely flipped the organisation's values on its head, because it is, as I say, an exclusionary service. It excludes males. It focuses just on female, and that's fine. But as soon as you allow self-ID, that means any man, whether it's someone with gender dysphoria or not, whether it's someone who's just got a sexual kink or it's just got any predator, male predator. Absolutely, because it's self-ID, or any man can just say, yes, I'm a female. Let me come in and supervise all those young girls.
Yeah,
that go
and
on
that's
camp.
been happening. That's been happening.
Absolutely.
As I read Karyn Lisignoli, I think that's her name, her book, right? The Abolition of Sex, and that's happening so wide and so deep. And her book is like based on what's happening in the US. And I thought, Australians were not that crazy yet, but apparently it's not the case. It's like quietly behind the public's, like you said, behind the public's general knowledge, seeping into our lives. I just feel like it's very sinister, quiet, sinister way that's seeping in. And from what you say, it definitely is not like a people's like people all of a sudden coming out and say, oh, I have been suppressed, all my sexuality, all this time. It is not like a people initiated movement. It sounds like it's a top down indoctrination, top down control, mind control kind of thing.
Well, and you're very correct in saying that this hasn't come from a people's movement. So if you think about feminism and you think about the gay rights movement and all of those sorts of things, there was a community swelling, that the community, the people who were suffering those injustices, etc., were lobbying and were talking to the community about it, and then the community joined them, and there was everybody else. And these things took a long time until all the community had the opportunity to talk about this, and then suddenly kind of go, actually, you know, we agree with you. I mean, like, think about it with gay marriage. It took about 20 odd years of community-based lobbying before all the community came to understand exactly what was involved in it and said, yes, we agree with this. Then the community went to the government and lobbied them to change the laws, the wider community.
Yeah.
What's happened with the transgender, though, is it's been lobbying behind the scenes. It's been very, very strategic lobbying. It's been happening for a very long time. It's been happening within the medical institution, and it's been happening at government level. And then all these laws have been changed without people realizing. And then all of a sudden now, and of course, these laws are changing, and only impacts on a relatively small amount of people to start with, AKA, so we change the laws, and the laws are like this in Australia, so that a man who suddenly identifies as a female can be incarcerated with females, etc. People don't know about it other than for a few individuals. The same with sport, the same with Girl Guides. People don't know about it, all this sort of stuff. And it's not until, as we say, that what's happened now is people like myself, and certainly I'm a tiny player, you know, other people who have been promoting this may have forced out or overseas, J.K. Rowling's, it's been happening here. Seeing what's happened with Catherine Deves. We saw what happened too then with people like Leah Thomas coming out and then winning in the sports. And now suddenly it's burst through into the mainstream. But we're kind of behind the 8 ball now, because now what we need to do is lobby the government to change the laws back to recognise a woman or a girl is only a biological female.
Like I've read about a little bit about how this has come to be. It started from like probably decades ago in the academic, right? In the universities and all that kind of things. And it seems to me that it's also part of a bigger cultural thing that happened in the academic, right? White supremacists and cultural appropriation, like all these narratives, it's kind of like one, it's like kind of at the end, it's like one big thing they're pushing top down from trying to get into the populations through the academic, because, you know, once you I think it's from the universities where you breed those the generations of next generation who's going to go out the world and be authorities and teach the next generation. So they start there. It's basically as one thing, right? One big thing, and there's different branches. The gender identity is one branch, the white supremacists, the cultural project, there's all different branches. Like all this started there and then just branch out to a top-down, basically like destroying humanity. Like, what is a man and woman? That's so basic. You know, we can put on label to say I'm an artist, like you're a leader coach, right? And we can put on all these titles and labels, but at the end of the day, what we are is a man and woman, right? In this physical reality. And they are destroying that. It's like as much as a social war, it's like a spiritual war.
Well, it's fundamentally underwriting, it's undermining very much undermining the values of Western society. So when you talk about it, it's not just in the transgender issue. So the transgender issue to me is kind of the ultimate head that all of this has come to. But effectively, in a very simplistic way, this is all about critical social justice theory, and that's what has been making its way through our institutions, and it's gone from the social sciences to the humanities, even to the hard sciences. It's gone into law, it's gone into everyone else. So people often here talk about critical race theory. So critical race theory is where an arm of critical social justice that just deals with race. And in a very simplistic term, it's kind of taken from a Marxist philosophy, which strips the world down into seeing who's the oppressed, who's the oppressor, and it strips all nuance, all complexity, and it looks at individual relations and societal relations only through the prism of power. Instead of looking at the entire complexities of what comes into play in terms of humanity and human beings, and even in our individual interactions. And as a result of that, it's then come into its ultimate head where we've suddenly got what we refer to as these oppressed groups or these victim groups. And then suddenly now trans are being presented as one
oppressed group,
as one of these victims groups, and it's extremely manipulative. Because the reality of it is that there's, under this huge umbrella of trans, there's a very, and historically there was a tiny percentage of the population that had what's referred to as body dysphoria, that sense of not feeling comfortable in their body, that sense of wanting to live as the other sex. It's a severe mental health problem. It needs to be treated with psychotherapy. But again, as a result of that lobbying behind the scenes, it was seen as, no, this isn't a mental health issue. This is just, I don't know. It's just a normal thing.
They don't now. If you say they have mental health issue, you are being offensive. You are being a bigot. You can't say they need to be treated for their mental health issue. You have to affirm them, and you have you have to like distort your own sense of reality to affirm them.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's like, so if you think about anorexia, that's a type of body dysphoria as well, or, you know, so when someone has got anorexia, they look in the mirror, they think they're fat, they will starve themselves to death. We would never think of affirming an anorexic. We would never think of saying, yes, here's some diet pills. Yes, let's do some stomach stapling to you. Yes, you're fat. We realize that there is a mental health problem, that what they're seeing isn't based in reality. But as I said, as a result of this aggressive lobbying behind the scenes, it isn't, it's been taken to be that this is just a normal form of expression. That's why it's been kind of lumped in with sexuality, which of course, as we know, is natural. There's no, I mean, if you're going to be homosexual or heterosexual, you don't have to do anything to your body. There's nothing, you know what I mean? Like it's just
you still accept like basic biological fact. There's no distortion of fact, right?
There's no distortion of facts. And what's happened now is, as a result of this, those people with genuine body dysphoria aren't getting the treatment that they need, and they haven't done for a long time. And also now what's happening is there's a massive social contagion effect, because of course this has been now promoted as this is okay, this is fine. Trendy, it's very fashionable. So you've got very young kids, particularly young girls, who are very susceptible to this type of social contagions. They're now being fast-tracked down a medicalization process, which is just abhorrent. And also what you've got, because now we've promoted self-ID, it means any man with a sexual kink, and there is a sexual kink called autogynephilia, which is men who get sexually aroused at the thought of being a woman and other people seeing them as a woman. And there's arguments that up to 75 or 80% of males who identify as trans actually have autogynephilia, which is probably the reason why they don't have genital surgery. They tend to just maybe take some hormones, maybe have breast implants, but don't actually have surgery on their genitals. Only 10% of transsexuals do. And so that means then all of these men now have got legally sanctioned right to access women's spaces and to demand that women address them as she. And again, even then, aside from that, just your bog standard predator who wants to access women can do it as well too, whether they've got a sexual kink or whether they're just a male predator. And we know what predators are like. Predators will pull out all stops to access women. You look at predators, they tend to be involved. So if you look at pedophiles, they always tend to be involved in school camps and things like this, etc. So they will deceive a whole community. They will groom an entire community. Predators will do what they need to do. I mean, because one of the arguments is, why is someone going to pretend to be a woman in order to do this? And it's like, it's really easy. They've just got to say, I'm a female. They have to do nothing else. They
and
just
get
have
access to their prey.
Access to their prey. Absolutely.
Just,
so we've got this Me Too movement where all we're talking about, and all of this has come to the fore to talk about how we need to stop men's violence against women. We need to believe women, all this sort of stuff. And then on the other hand here, we're saying, oh, by the way, guys, all you predators, here's
the social justice thing, like how everything is being used, even the feminism, right? It's like woman, Mary Wollstonecraft, I think she was probably one of the earliest to ask for women have rights, right? ever since then, the likes of Rockefeller, that kind of people, what I call the evil people, the evildoers, the elites, but they use all these things that are good, right? They are good, and they weaponize it for evil. Same with feminism.
Okay, so I don't know whether I don't believe this is done by evil elites who are manipulating the community. I think this comes out from people who, I think that there are a lot of us who have got to focus on social justice, but what happens is, in examining that, people will often get a very wrong idea about where these injustices come from. I think that it comes down fundamentally to very simplistic thinking, that it's a lot easier to go, I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy, to split the world down into good versus bad, evil, wrong, right versus wrong. And certainly that's how our brains are hardwired to operate. And then I think that there becomes this, it's a very simplistic argument. It's couched in very verbose language that it sounds an awful lot more sophisticated than what it is. And it's done all under the guise of kindness and compassion. And it's true, the overwhelming majority of people do want to be kind, do want to be compassionate. We do understand that the world's not fair, and we realize that the world's not fair just because there's differences between people. Like, it's very true that if you're a beautiful person, there will be many more doors open for you than if you're not. It's very true that if you're an intelligent person, there's much more options in terms of what you can study, the type of careers you can go into, the money that you can make, all that sort of stuff. So the world isn't fair. The family that you grow up in, if you grow up in a loving, kind family, and that's the biggest privilege you'll ever have, is to grow up in a loving, kind, supportive family, you're going to have a foundation and a sense of connection and an opportunity to thrive that's so much better, that's incomparable to someone who grows up in an abusive or emotionally distraught family, or a family with massive poverty and other issues, etc. People with disabilities are obviously going to have a lot more challenges than people who are able-bodied, and all this sort of stuff. So we understand the world's not fair. We also understand that there's certain people who will be corrupt or will be interested in perpetuating their own agenda, often at the expense of others. So it's very easy for us to then extrapolate and think that that's what the whole world is, and that we're all down here, we're the victims, and they're these people up here who are oppressing us. So it's very easy for people to think
but then,
that way.
you look back at, what you described, right? So for example, the family unit, if you come from like a good family where you have mom, dad, who try to do the best for you and all that kind of things, right? So what part of this gender identity thing, you can look at it, is clearly destroys the family unit, and clearly also making the person who subscribe to do this gender identity, especially girls, right? Sometimes even boys, become disabled. Like, you chop off your boobs, you chop off your penis, it's creating disability and all the hormone blockers they're on, right? Basically making you ill from a young age. Again, destroying the family unit. When you don't even have the basic family unit, when you don't even know your man or woman, like, there's no talk about having a family. And when you don't have family, who owns you? The state.
Absolutely. And what the thing that's quite ironic about this is being pushed by adult transsexuals, transgenders, etc., who all went through puberty, who all have the opportunity, unless they have genital surgery themselves, but that's only 10% that do, they all have the opportunity to conceive children. And what they're doing is now pushing young children into taking puberty blockers where they won't have that opportunity. They're enforcing infertility, and actually not just infertility, no sexual function in these children, despite the fact for them, they've got both of those options. They have the ability to orgasm, they have the ability to get aroused, and they have the ability to have children. It is abhorrent. It is absolutely abhorrent. And what's happened is, Unfortunately, it's very easy for our brains to just think very simplistically. We're told this is the kind thing to do. This is compassionate. This is what these kids are genuinely like. And there's with the data and the facts, the figures that are presented to people are very manipulative. All these children are going to suicide unless you do this. And therefore people rush into it without thinking because they believe in their head that what they're doing is the kind and the compassionate thing.
Yeah, I think the kind of passionate thing, just like I say, it's been weaponized again. People's, general, desire to be good and kind, weaponized as basically, because I come from China, right? My mom, my parents gone through the Cultural Revolution, and when my mom told me how there was one night, her siblings, her brother and parents just escaped the country to the city, the town center to the country, where they would just started to then drag out the people who have a little bit well off. So basically it just sounds, because it's like they use that to use your neighbors, to use people to police people.
Your parents understand what it's like, and it breaks my heart to think of what they had to go through. What they experienced was a mass delusion, and that communist ideology that pitted person against person, that said these group of people here, the academics, the landowners, the business keepers, the farmers, they're part of the elites, they're part of the oppressors, and suddenly then they were stripped of all humanity, and they were humiliated. They were killed. It was just abhorrent. And that is exactly the same type of mentality we've got here, except we're not walking around. We haven't got the stakes yet. And we're not actually physically abusing people, but it's exactly the same thing that's happening. It's a mass delusion. People are arguing whether or not biology is real. As soon as the fact that in the UK, there are hate laws. If you say a person can't change their sex, you can be charged for hate. There is the state that is supporting that delusion. We are literally living through a time of mass delusion that's come through from critical social justice. And that's exactly the same that happened in China. It was Marxism. That's the same type of thing in critical social justice. Here's the oppressed, here's the oppressors. It stripped everyone's humanity away. And the impact that it had on China was just dreadful, like every communist country everywhere. And this is the
that's
same
coming
thing.
to the West. Clearly,
It's in the West. It's in the West.
It's in the West.
You just have to read Douglas Murray, read his new book, and read what he's been talking about for a long, long time, him and many others. This is undermining of all the institutions that the Western civilization is based on. It's based on trust. It's based on liberalism. It's based on the individual is supreme, that who the individual is, you need to judge people on their behavior, on their actions and their values, not on their group identity. And the concept of judging people on the basis of their group identity, you're in this business, or you're this particular ethnicity, or you're this gender, or you're this sex, you're this sex or whatever, actually then it's abhorrent. It is.
When it's exactly like you say, how you just group people into different identities, and one group is oppressor and one group is the victim, and it's almost like a virtue to be a victim. And it's same as during the Cultural Revolution in China. If you are poor, basically, if you have nothing, then you are good. But if you have worked really hard to accumulate a little bit of wealth to make yourself slightly well off, right? Then you're bad. Then you are the oppressor. And that happened. Basically, just dividing people into groups. Like you say, in the West, you are like you are white, you are bad. You are heterosexual, you are bad. You are and did you just say that in the UK, you actually cannot say to a man who identifies as a woman that you are not a woman, otherwise you commit a hate crime?
Yes, it's
by
classified
law.
as a hate crime. Yes.
And what's the penalty for that?
I'm not certain whether it's a fine or not, but it's definitely illegal. And what I can't understand about that is that's been law for a while. So this is where I was saying before, these kind of laws come in, but they will often contradict other laws. So in the UK, there's an Equality Act, which still recognises biological sex. So they bring in these other laws that contradict it. So they bring in laws that allow self-AD when it comes to incarceration, when it comes to sports, when it comes to this. And they had it in terms of this criminal offence, in terms of a hate law. There was a former police officer who got charged as a result of a tweet that he did. He then took it to the High Court, and this is the only thing that happens is when you've got these laws that contradict each other, the only way the general population finds out about this, or the only way they can address this, is if someone then has the resources to take that and fight that all the way through the court. So then they can say, well, actually, you can't be charged with this because this base level law over here protects people for that. And that was quite a famous case, and it was finalized not long ago. So it's very interesting that you've still then, despite the fact that you've had this case which has proved that it's not hate to say that, you've still got the police in the UK advertising in certain situations and saying that this is still a hate crime. So it's really, yeah, it's quite incredible that even though some of these isolated cases have come up, there is still areas of the country that are still heavily promoting it. And this is where there's lots of legal battles back and forward, but there's still a lot of people who are obviously thinking they're on the right side of the law, because of course people are drawing on different information to justify their behavior. Now, I remember when we got, it became illegal, was it just in Australia or was it WA? I'm not certain whether it was a state or a federal law. This was many decades back, where it became an offence, where it became illegal to, one of the kind of discrimination laws was against if you caused offence. And like, now, before we had laws against, you couldn't harass people, you couldn't, threaten people and that sort of stuff. And then when they changed that to say that it was also an offence to say something that caused someone else to have offence, to be offended by that, I remember thinking at the time, hang on, that's really dangerous.
Yeah.
Who determines what's offensive or not? There is nothing. The laws are supposed to be based on objectivity, not subjectivity.
Exactly.
Because what's offensive to me is not offensive to you. What can be an innocent statement by someone can be highly offensive to someone else. Now, how many times can you make an innocent comment?
And I can say you are being offensive to me if I don't like you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And how many things can be offensive when people are completely unintended? You know what I mean? Like, I haven't had children. Some people may say to me, oh, gosh, Karyn, why haven't you had children? That could be something that could be quite offensive to me, quite painful to me. Do I then have the right to run off to the law, or do I actually, as a self-aware human being and a person with emotional resilience, you just need to kind of go, well, just didn't turn out for me. You just,
in a way, you can say that they are protecting those like are emotionally really fragile. But then, but people, instead of protecting those people who are emotionally fragile, you should encourage them to be emotionally resilient.
That's right. It's not, and you're not protecting them.
You're not protecting anyone. And the danger is that you are basically stripping away everyone's freedom of speech, of thought. And at the end of the day, it's a two-double-edged sword. We think, and on one side, you're like, oh, I'm protecting those who are emotionally fragile and that kind of thing. But it's actually not. It can easily be used, like I say, like a weapon, to then they can strip away your rights and your freedom in any way. This is so, like you say, so subjective.
Absolutely. And also to emotional resilience, emotional capacity, self-awareness. Now, emotional resilience and emotional regulation is a key aspect that people need to develop within their own human psychology in order to thrive in life. There is so much evidence from psychological research that shows that we need to be able to do this. AKA, we need to be able to deal with the barbs of life. We need to be able to deal with the delusional thinking in our heads, which we all have. We can all get upset. You know what I mean? So trying to protect people from that is the opposite of protecting them. By trying to take away the potential danger, you create you create more fear, more vulnerability, less resilience in the person, because when we need to address our insecurities and our fears, we need to move towards them and not away from them. And yes, it will be painful, but it's through that painful process that you develop emotional resilience and grit. It's exactly the same if you think about it, physicality.
Yes.
You're not fit. You can't become fit without physical pain. You need to do the hard work. You need to exercise. You need to do all that aerobic stuff. It hurts. Your whole body's screaming at you. And you have to do that in order to build your fitness, in order to build your strength, in order to build your muscles, your heart, lung capacity, etc. So then you can thrive physically. And it's exactly the same emotionally as well.
So how's the law in Australia? Because you say the law in the UK, we have these conflicting laws. The new law is trying to make hateful speech. So in Australia, we also have the law about the cause of offense. Like you cannot say things that cause offense. Is that in the law now?
That's in the law. That's been in our law for a long time. Again, I'm not certain whether it's state and federal. So what we have here, of course, we've got state and federal laws. So if we look at one of the biggest issues in the UK, they've got the Equality Act, which is the basic act from where discrimination comes from, from where all the discrimination laws come from. And in the UK, sex is a protected characteristic. And it used to be in Australia, but at both the federal level and at a lot of the state levels, particularly Victoria, I think the ACT, I think South Australia, I think Queensland's looking to do it. WA is definitely looking to do it. They're looking to change the equivalent of that Equality Act to change it from sex-based rights to gender-based rights, and gender being defined as anyone who self-ID. So previously we used to have sex, which was called biological sex, and then we had gender, and gender was seen as the behaviors that go along with that sex. And now it's been extrapolated to say that there's apparently all these genders, etc., blah, 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 blah.
So
blah,
in New South, what about in New South Wales? Are they also trying to?
I'm not certain what the case is in New South Wales, but basically, and even at the federal level, I know it's changed at the federal level.
Has it changed, or are they looking to change it, or has already?
I think it happened in Gillard's government. It was changed at the federal level. So it's been in for a while. There's arguments I've heard from certain lawyers that the way the law is written, it's still very, it's still open, a certain level of open to interpretation. But certainly in Victoria, my understanding is it's quite clear.
So this such a big change that has already happened for a long time, and the public's not even aware of it at all.
Public's not aware of it, no. So in WA, we've had, so in terms of, that's what I'm saying, and we've got the different acts that contradict each other. So in WA, we have, it would be definitely the same in Victoria, etc., in the other states, where male prisoners can self-identify and be incarcerated with females, etc. So
this is in Australia too. Like a male prisoner can say, like I'm just trying to make the audience aware what the implication of this would be, right? And it's happening not just in the US, because in the US, I think people can go to read Kara Dansky's book, and you can see plenty of cases, like law cases and real life example that's happening. But it's happening in Australia too, where because of the law change, a male prisoner who committed rape, whatever, can actually say, I identify as a woman, and then go to a women's prison and do whatever the heck he.
There are males incarcerated in female prisons in Australia. We've seen it in sports. We've got it in sports as well. We've got males competing against females in sports.
Yeah, I see in Australia.
These laws over here. We also have the laws. We've had cases in WA with the same thing, where there's the affirmation model that's coming from the psychological associations, that it's coming from the gender clinics and that sort of stuff as well too. We had a very famous case in WA where a family lost access to their child because they refused to affirm their child's identity as trans, and they lost access to their child.
How old is their child?
It was a high school student, so it was under 16.
Like a teenager.
We have school, teenager, a vulnerable teenager. We have school kids. It may even have been primary school. I thought it was early high school, but either way, they're juveniles. They're juveniles. They're underage children. We have, the same thing happening in schools over here, where schools will affirm the child and keep it hidden from the parents. I mean, I was horrified. I've been watching this online for a long time in the UK and the US, and it wasn't until what happened here with after I got terminated, and then I went public, and when I was in the Australian, and then I got a whole pile of people contact me, and I had some amazing people contact me, and that's when I discovered, to my horror, that pretty much the legal situation in Australia is the same as, if not worse, than it is over there. And some of the concerns here is because we've changed the Equality Act. In the UK, the Equality Act wasn't changed, and that's the reason now why they're able to fight back against it.
So when you say the Equality Act, do you mean the cause offense part?
No, the Equality Act is where we give a definition of what are the particular characteristics.
So that's what included gender.
You're not allowed to discriminate against. So you're not allowed to discriminate against people on the basis of disability, on the basis of sexuality, on the basis of their sex, that sort of stuff as well too. And that's where they've then changed the definition of sex to not be biological female, but anyone who self-IDs. So it's a long time back, they had just biological female. Then they changed it in certain laws to have people who were transsexuals who had gone through full transition. So that means that they'd had full genital surgery. And if they had done that in certain states, you got what was referred to as a Gender Recognition Act. So therefore, you could then be classified as the opposite sex because you'd effectively gone through a full physical transition. And that was done because, of course, then we had people who looked and presented fully as females. They had breasts, they didn't have a penis, etc. But then they had a driver's license, they had a passport, etc. that was saying Mr. whatever. And so it was given to allow them to change that so that their documentation, etc. Aligned with effectively how they were presenting and how they changed their body. So they changed the secondary sex characteristics, aka breasts, genitals. You can't, of course, change the DNA. You can't change the internals because, of course, sex is involved.
It doesn't change. No matter what you add on or take away, you don't change.
That's right. Just like a female who has a hysterectomy or a female has a double mastectomy is no longer, it doesn't mean that she's no longer a female. It just means it's the female who's had a hysterectomy, who no longer has a uterus, no longer has breasts, but it's still a female. So, and this is how the lobbying starts. So there's this lobbying behind the scenes, and you can see that it makes sense. And it's like, well, this is really unfair for this small percentage of the population. It's very difficult for them. So yes, then we change that law. Then it suddenly becomes, well, what about those people who can't afford full transition? I mean, that's not fair. So then it becomes, okay, well, if these people have been taking hormones for a while and they've been living as the opposite sex, etc., then therefore we can maybe allow them. And then it becomes on, well, why do they have to be that? Why can't we just be self-ID?
You know what? It's like a take one step into your space, you back up a little bit, okay, and then they take another step, and then just give all these justifications why they can take more and more of your space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's classically the slippery slope. You concede a little bit, and then you give more and you give more and you give more. And that's also too why they manipulate the language, because once you've manipulated the language, then it becomes harder and harder to defend yourself because words have no meaning. It's the same with racism. Racism means to assign negative attributes to another race, to a group of people based on their race. Then suddenly, as a result of critical race theory, it became, no, you had to be the more powerful person. So that's what the more powerful group, and which is why then apparently you can't be racist against whites. And it's very interesting. You're Chinese, you would know that in China, they're often racist against whites.
Oh yeah, we call you.
Oh yeah, I used to live in South Korea. You know what I mean? Like,
Chinese people are like living in China. Chinese people are very racist towards, because there are like many different ethnic groups in China. They often say 56 ethnic groups in China, and the dominant race is the Han ethnic
Yes.
groups, and they're
Yeah.
absolutely racist against other ethnic groups. And also in Canton, the people who speak Cantonese, they're definitely racist against people who speaks Mandarin in other cities. Like, you know,
Yes, and obviously not all of them, but some of them.
yeah,
Absolutely.
of course, there's some of them.
Anyone can be racist against any other group. There is actually a big argument to say that the drive for racism is actually biological, because again, that comes down to our brains. Our brains are hardwired to make sure that we fit in with the mob. Our brains are hardwired to see what's different. So you could see from historical man, as we were evolving, we would have been very suspicious of any person who came along who was slightly different to our tribe of people. So, and this seems to be evidence, the fact that it's kind of a biological drive, by the fact that pretty much every ethnic group, every cultural group, most of them, I would imagine, has had some level of racism or fear of other people, or desire to keep their group over here, they're kind of in group pure for another group. And that's kind of been in everyone's history for a very long time. And it's been in Western societies, as I said, not to say that it hasn't also happened in other societies, but certainly that's been a very core aspect of Western society, that focus on liberalism and humanism, which then goes, we don't judge you on the basis of your race. Yes. So yes, and once you start changing the meanings of words, and that's what happened. Suddenly then to be white meant that you could never be racist, which is completely absurd. You pick yourself up as a white person and throw yourself in another country where you're the only white person there, and you suddenly realize who's got the power or not. You know what I mean? And that's what they're doing with the trans agenda. We manipulate the meanings of words, and then all of a sudden then you find yourself in a situation where you can't defend or present an argument because the words have no meaning anymore. They've been completely
even their insistent use of pronouns, right? That is very pervasive. How can you support your argument, stand on like solid grounds to say anything that's credible when you keep calling a man she, right? You can't, like, they just use this to really shaking your foundation.
It's about control and domination, because first of all, you don't use pronouns to someone's face. You and I talking together, you don't suddenly say she. You'll say Karen or you. You'll only refer to she if you're talking about her, if you're talking about me to someone else. So if you were chatting to someone afterwards, you could say, oh, I had this wonderful conversation with Karen. She's this, she's that, she's that. So you don't actually use it face to face with. So it's ultimately controlling how you can talk when you're actually not directly engaging with the person. It's very much about coercion and control. And then when you think about, come back to autogynephiles, they get sexually aroused at the thought of being a female. They get sexually aroused at having females have to address them in that way. It is emotional manipulation, and it is control. It is narcissism to the nth degree, because fundamentally, you can call me whatever you want when I'm not around. You don't even have to use pronouns. You can call me the world's biggest bitch or whatever you want to. I've got no control over that. And I don't want to. That's your right to speak about me however you see fit.
But they want to control how you speak about them. So when you say, like, from the group where men identify as women, what's the percentage of them they are like have this condition where they're sexually aroused by?
So what was referred to, the autogynephiles. AGPs, just call them AGPs. It's autogynephilia. There are arguments that up to 75 to 80% of transsexuals have autogynephilia. So in other words, it's not a dysphoria, it's a euphoria. So they're not feeling distress in their body and wanting to change, which is what the mental health issue is, which is what body dysphoria is, which leads to transsexualism. They actually get a euphoria. They get sexually aroused at this. But they've now got the ability to come under this banner of saying that I'm trans and therefore then they get accepted. Because if this was a movement, if everyone knew that this was a movement, this was a bunch of men with a kink standing up and saying, I get really aroused if you call me a female. I get really aroused at touching my own breasts now that I've had breast implants. I get really aroused at the thought of going into a women's change room. I'll get aroused, first of all, because I'm heterosexual, so I'm going to get sexually aroused at seeing all those women, but it's going to be extra arousing because of the fact that those women have to have me in there, have to call me she. If that was presented as an argument, it would never have got anywhere. But they had the ability to slip under this agenda of the kind of trans banner.
Yeah,
and
because they are
oppressed
now. They are victims now.
It's an opportunity to come under this banner, which is why there are people who I refer to as genuine transsexuals, who are people who are adults who have transitioned and who will say, I have not changed my sex. I have changed my secondary characteristics. I'm choosing to live as the opposite sex. I wanted you to treat me with respect. I respect your sex-based rights. I don't want to access your spaces. This is what I've done. This has helped me with my dysphoria. This is so I want to live my life in peace. But no, I have not changed sex. And no, I haven't done this because it turns me on. I've done this to get a state of ease and to address their dysphoria. Now, I don't know, I would argue because of the fact this aggressive lobbying that very few of those people have had probably extensive therapy in order to find out what's underneath that. But even if they did have extensive therapy, the field of psychology is a fairly new field. Psychology struggles to treat some very common mental health problems, so it can have success in certain areas. But even with addiction, I mean, addiction is a very common problem. The success rates for psychological interventions for addiction is still quite small. So it's still a very new field, let alone trying to address something as complex as body dysphoria, particularly when they haven't been able to work in it for so long. So it's not like they've been doing this work for decades and they've been able to research what works, etc. So it would be true. And even if people did have intensive therapy, they may then still choose to medicalize their bodies in order to live in the opposite sex. And thank heavens we live in a wealthy, abundant society and a tolerant society that kind of went, fair enough. If that's fundamentally what you have to do to feel okay with yourself, to not feel distressed, that's fine. But your rights end where mine do.
Yeah.
And this is what's happening here. This is all coming under the guise of inclusion, but it's not inclusion, it's intrusion, which then excludes the people that genuinely needed to be included. So this is again the manipulation of words. Inclusion was a social justice issue because there were people who were denied access to things that they needed to do. So women who weren't allowed to vote, women who weren't allowed to work. Once you got married, my older sisters, they used to work for the local council. When they got married, they had to stop work. Married women were not allowed to work, right? So this is something where you can see this is an inclusion issue. These women were excluded from something that needed to be their basic rights, right? And it's now been extrapolated so far to be inclusion means all doors are open to all people, which is rubbish because not everyone can access all the different spaces. Medical schools won't let me in, thank heavens. I'm not smart enough to be a doctor. So we have these things. Same with Girl Guides, same with what Boy Scouts used to be. There is benefits. We have schools that are single sex segregated. There are benefits in certain situations to have sexes separate, etc. It's not an inclusion issue. If some kids can't go to this place, it's even like with certain different clubs and things like that. So there's been a manipulation of that word so much now that what we do is we just want to see if things aren't seen as being equal and fair, therefore there's an injustice and therefore someone's being excluded, instead of saying there can be a multitude of reasons why there aren't certain people represented, why there's differences. Think of being CEOs of your Fortune 500 companies. There is much less, there's much fewer women in those roles in regards to men. Is that because of sexism? That could be one factor. Is it also because women tend to raise children and bear children, and when they do so, they need to take a certain amount of time out of work, which can impact on their careers? Is it because often when women have children, they suddenly realize, I actually don't want to be working 14-hour days? To be a CEO at that level, that's what the lifestyle is. And there's a lot of females who will just say, no, thank you. It happens in law firms.
Yeah.
Lots of investment in females to become partners, and then they get there and then they suddenly go, really?
Yeah.
You know, but so it's not an injustice.
Yes, I know. Like the thing with the feminism is, you know, it's not for women to become more like men and do what men do. We have to recognize that what women naturally are and what women, you know, want to do is also valid as a woman. You know, it's like we don't have to be the CEO if we don't want to. We don't have to do what, because that what that is because society values the roles that men play more, and then therefore feminism has been used as a tool to make women want to act like men and take the role that men do. But that is devaluing women.
Yeah, and again, it's a lot more complicated than that, but it's certainly the case that the reason why, particularly like first wave feminism, we knew where it came from. Women weren't allowed to vote. They had no property rights. Like they literally had no rights. You know what I mean? So second wave feminism came out once we got those rights, because then also women realized that there was still these kind of gender roles, you know, and that not all women fit into that. Not all women were maternal. A lot of women wanted to have careers, etc., and all this sort of stuff. So the idea of that was to say, let's stop having these strict gender roles assigned with each female, because some females may be more masculine than feminine, and vice versa for men, etc. Wasn't really pushing that. It was also, you know, but what happens is, again, with a lot of these social movements, they start off with good intentions, but then they end up swinging too far. And intentionally or unintentionally, it is true that second wave feminism in many ways ended up devaluing motherhood. And then a lot of these women who chose to be stay-at-home mums felt like they were suddenly, you know, on the nose, that this wasn't to be, you weren't an empowered woman and all this sort of stuff. So I think this is what happens with these movements. They start off with good intentions, but then they narrow down too much. Instead of actually going, what we're trying to achieve is coming back to that kind of liberalism and the humanistic principles, which is, let's create an environment where people have the opportunity to thrive. And how people have the opportunity to thrive is when people have access to health, when they have access to education, when they have the opportunity to make choices for themselves, and they're not going to face a level of discrimination or prejudice as a result of the choices that they make, and that collectively we respect each other's choices as well too. And that's where it comes down to. Your human rights end where mine begin. And in societies, we need to, by doing this, and we have a lot of change, we need to just keep having these conversations about it. But unfortunately, what happens is people suddenly become quite dogmatic in the argument, rather than kind of trying to say, here's the complexity. You hear people still do it now. Like you hear people say, what do you think caused this? And I go, and then they say, was it just this thing here? Was it just social contagion? And it's like, that's one factor. In everything, there's multiple determinants of why we do things. I give the example of eating. So if you think about eating, people think, well, what causes you to eat? One thing, we're hungry. Well, no, people often eat. People often eat when they're not hungry.
Exactly, yeah.
That's
the cause of overweight and a lot of the weight issues.
So people eat because they're hungry. People will eat sometimes because they're sad and they want to feel good. Even when you eat too, if you eat just because you're hungry, all you got to do is have bog standard food. Whereas we want our food to be flavoursome, etc. So we want it to be sensual. We want it to be tasty. When we want to eat, absolutely. Sometimes we want social connection as well too. Why do we all go out for breakfast and we go out for lunch? We want things to be attractive. I know that when I'm eating, if I get some takeaway food, I'll take it out of the takeaway container and I'll put it on some of my nice crockery, because I like to eat the nice crockery, right? So here's all the multiple factors, motivators that coming into something as simple as eating. We try to think about something as complex as a family, human relationships, workplaces. How can we possibly think that all of these things are stripped down to just a unidimensional motivation or a unidimensional reason for why they happen? People are complex, our societies are complex, and this trying to strip the nuance away again is lower level thinking that we're all hardwired to do and that we all do most of the time. We all hear about our monkey mind, the amygdala. Every thought that comes through, every impulse that comes through our brain comes through the amygdala before it gets to the prefrontal cortex. And it's the amygdala who breaks things down to these very simple black versus white, etc., which is why we can have incredibly intelligent people who will still perpetuate these very simplistic black-white thinking, unidimensional, it's good, it's bad, it's caused by this, it's not caused by that, instead of saying there are multiple factors that all come into play here.
Yeah. Well, Karyn, I want to just, before we finish off, I just want to bring back to the gender identity thing, because I really want people to start realizing this is not just some fancy talk that doesn't touch upon our lives. It is affecting our lives. I have a friend who he has 3 young girls, and he goes to I think it's a shopping center or restaurant. There's a bathroom actually that has a symbol, half the normal man symbol and half with a dress, right? So this is going into our life. So just like, I want you to tell the audience who's listening why this is an issue that affects us, our lives, the lives of our children, and what we can do about it. Okay.
It does, it affects it, because basically what we're doing is we're being taught to not believe what our eyes see. We're being taught to go against all of our instincts. So as I was saying before, that as a society, we need to operate, we need to be a certain level of trust, there needs to be a certain level of connection, etc. So if we can't trust what our own eyes see, if we can't trust our own instincts, the whole foundations of the connections within society will break down. So that's the most fundamental issue. We also have then a situation where these lies are being perpetuated. This is impacting overwhelmingly on young girls, so that enormous numbers of these young girls who have got other vulnerabilities and other distresses, they've often got depression, eating disorders, autism, etc., are suddenly being channeled down this fairly irreversible pathway with, as you say, strong medicalization, which has irreversible impacts on their body. It's also then impacting on young gay kids, so that again, a lot of the gay community instead of just being allowed to be gay, are suddenly being told, okay, well, if you're not traditionally male or not traditionally female, if you like some of these other things, therefore you're trans. So it's actually perpetuating all the old sexual stereotypes that we talked about, all women's protections. Now that we've made it so that any man can identify, means that there can't possibly be any safeguards for females, whether it's change rooms, whether it's prisons, whether it's sports, whether it's, as I said, anywhere, schools, etc. So the foundations, the protections that we have to support each other and to allow each other to thrive are being fundamentally broken down, because we are undermining science, we're undermining biology, we're undermining social rules and social institutions, and we are fueling what is actually delusion. And it's so bad now that we even have some of our scientific organizations also going along with this under the guise of compassion. So I think this is almost like this is the crack. So there've been a lot of work. Critical social justice has been undermining our Western societies for a long time. And this now is where it's all coming to its fruition. And this is all the cracks starting to come they've come up from the foundations, they're coming up through the walls, and the whole thing. I know this might sound like hyperbole, but it's not. If you can't trust your eyes, if you can't say, this is what I know, and every gut instinct that you are being told is not right. If you cannot trust your own instincts and you cannot trust what you see with your own eyes, what can you trust? Nothing. So it is actually, it's an incredibly, incredibly serious issue. And all those rights that we've been fighting for, to recognize the biological differences between males and females. And as you say, feminism has gone through these different movements too. There were stages in feminism where we said, yeah, males and females are exactly the same. And then we kind of came, no, we're not. We've got more alike, we've got more commonalities and similarities than we have differences, but the differences that we have are quite extreme. And sport is a pure example of this. Young girls, teenage girls, drop out of sports at alarming rates. This has been an issue for many years, and we want to encourage young girls to keep being sport because of all the physical benefits it has. One of the reasons why girls drop out is because girls become so self-conscious about their bodies, they become so concerned about being accepted, etc. So now we've got a situation where we're actually now introducing boys and males into competing against them. So the injustice and the unfairness is overwhelming. We've got women incarcerated, male sexual offenders, we then identify as female, get incarcerated with women and assault them again. This has happened in the UK. It's happened in the US. And in the UK, it's been going on for that long that we've now had the men come out of prison and, funnily enough, self-ID as men again. So this is a fundamental human rights issue. There are differences between the sexes. We are biologically different. We're both deserving of equal respect, compassion, and human rights. Our whole society is based on this, and this is what is being undermined, and it's all incorrect. It's scientifically incorrect. It's all based on an ideology, which is just a theory. There's no evidence base to support it. It's been completely manipulated, and it's impacting on thousands and thousands and thousands of lives.
Yeah. So for the audience, what if the audience are starting to realize this, but they've been fed all this, right? Whenever you go on social media, they've been fed this. What do? They
need to have the courage to stand up. It's exactly, they need to have the courage to stand up. It's the same, like as you said, the communist revolution, that was done by a smaller percentage of people rather than the majority. But people don't have the courage to speak, first of all, because it's difficult to challenge it, because it's all done under the guise of kindness and compassion. But now we can see the lies in that argument. People need to have the courage to stand up. They need to push back against it everywhere they see it, whether that's on social media, their conversations with fellow parents. They need to attend their school meetings and see what's happening in their school meetings. They need to attend their sport clubs. They need to keep pushing and demanding that biological sex-based rights are respected. And when the parents speak, the community will follow. They also need to aggressively lobby and talk to their politicians and their parliamentarians, go to their local MPs and talk to them about it as well too. Because when they realize that this is the majority of the community that is no longer going to stand for this, then the laws will reconcile back so that we will have these protections. But it takes courage, and people need to stand up, and people need to trust that it's much more out in the open now. People understand it a lot more, despite the fact the vilification that J.K. Rowling got, the vilification that Catherine Deves got, etc. They've had overwhelmingly much more people come out in support of them. So it's courage and talk, courage and talk. Don't turn a blind eye and think it's not going to happen to you. It's interesting. I've got some friends who are parents of teenage children, and they've said to me, why are you so passionate about this? It's not such a big deal to me. And I just think, my gosh, if this is not a big deal to you, you need to make it a big deal.
Yeah.
Because
don't wait till it comes into your home, your child comes to you and say, I think I'm trans. Then you are in so much deep shit.
Absolutely.
We don't want to wait to that stage, because it's happened for long enough. Going behind the curtains, going behind the eyes of the public eyes into our law and everything. If we just think, oh, it hasn't touched on my personal life yet, I'm just going to turn a blind eye. That's how in the Cultural Revolution, you see that your parents, your teacher, or probably yourself get dragged into the center of the town and get boiling oil poured over your head because you think it doesn't affect me yet. It's okay. I'm just not going to stick my head out. And everyone does that. And that's, Yeah.
And then by the time you want to, it's too late. That's where we are in Australia. But it's too late too late in the sense that it has slipped its ways into laws, that it's too late in the fact that you may get some vilification. You may even lose your job. You're not going to get burning oil point, but you're not going to get burning oil point poured over you. So let's start standing up and speaking up now, because there is more and more people that are doing it. And the more of us do it, you know, the more of us that do it, the more courage we will get. More other people will start doing it. And suddenly the silent majority will become the vocal majority, rather than being silent.
And we need to also recognize that the majority actually recognize the biological fact. They're just silent because they are either they don't think it affects them, or they're afraid of being, you know, canceled and blah blah blah, that kind of things. But majority people do recognize that biological fact, and they don't think men can be a woman or vice versa. So
absolutely. And I think it's just a very isolated cases, but these very isolated cases, suddenly you turn around and, like I say, you've got mainstream institutions confirming this ideology. You've got schools that are choosing to side with the child rather than the parents, and actively working to exclude the parents. So the situation is now, people can't let it go on any longer, and people need to have the courage to just stand up and speak, and have the private conversations as well. It's like, as I was talking about before, when we had major social movements before, they came about from people having these conversations themselves at their dinner parties, within their families, within their friends, within their workplaces. Everyone needs to be talking about this, not seeing it as this slight fringe issue, and actually realize just how mainstream it's become, and actually work to push against it. Courage.